Hello everybody, Dr. Duke, and this is part 3 of our 4-part series on universities entitled Universities, History, Purpose, and Politics. We've had a really fantastic discussion so far, I think. We looked at the medieval universities and the Christian origins, intellectually, spiritually, of the entire Western university system. Last week we took a look at the American universities. We looked very carefully at the foundation of the American universities, how they differed, the Protestant universities, from their Catholic forerunners. We took a good long look at the curriculum of those schools and the ethos of them and what they were meant to do. Now we turn our attentions to the modern university in part 3. And the modern universities, I have to begin by pointing out what really remarkable achievements the modern university is. The major universities, the ones with the biggest endowments, the ones that house the most original creative research, particularly in the math and science areas, they're shockingly innovative, they're shockingly successful. As we'll see shortly, the number of Nobel Prize winners, the number of Rhodes Scholars that they turn out, the number of achievements, advancements, technologies, innovations in fields ranging from medicine to physics to chemistry. It's absolutely extraordinary. There's nothing like it in the world. The American universities, of all the world's great universities, most of which, let's be honest, occur in the free Western world, most of the world's great universities, particularly the American universities, are absolute hubs of economy. Universities like Ohio State, for instance, in the middle of Ohio, it describes itself as the engine of Ohio's economy, and there's a lot of truth to that. The big research-based land-grant universities, the amount of commerce, trade, wealth, education, literacy they bring to their states, their economies, is simply staggering. It is, as we'll see in a moment too, the collective endowments and wealth of the major universities collectively in this country is more than almost all but a handful of countries worldwide. You take the American, the top 25 U.S. colleges, research universities, and their endowments, what they generate, what they have in holdings and wealth and property, it's bigger than the economies of most of the countries in the world. That's just the university system. So they're really remarkable things. There are also places, the American universities in particular, have been pretty broad-minded too in admitting a wide swath of American domestic life. The universities are really open to anybody who has a dream and a desire to go. And we'll talk about the dangers of this for next time, but pretty much even people who aren't qualified end up being able to go to universities if they want to try it. There's all sorts of opportunity to go. We have kids graduating from high school with degrees that don't mean much. Many high school diplomas for juniors and seniors because of social promotion and all the other garbage that they're getting now in the public schools. The university, the high school education, does not prepare them for college, and nevertheless we're accepting them at colleges in droves. Oftentimes that is for selfish reasons. We're getting all that federal student grant money, student aid money, student loan money we're getting too. But the fact is that universities, for better or for worse, have left an indelible mark on American history, and most of the time that has been a positive. And we'll see again moving forward where the negatives are. But I have to begin today's lecture by stressing that, emphasizing that. Even though the modern university is an increasingly godless place, they are becoming increasingly not just they started by being indifferently, in the last 50, 60 years, they went from being indifferently Christian to outright ignoring Christianity. And now, if you read the newspapers, we know that our universities are becoming downright hostile to Christianity, to conservatism, to traditional values, to traditional institutions, to the founders of this country, to capitalism, to free markets. Pretty much everything that it took thousands of years to evolve and to bring the kind of prosperity and relative peace it's brung. Now, those things are under attack at our major universities. There are obviously pockets. Any big department in a big school like Ohio State or the University of Wisconsin or the University of California system, in any department of 20, 30 faculty, you'll be able to find 1 or 2 holdouts. But the vast majority of the faculty are going to be pretty inimical to those values. And so, moving forward, Part 3, the modern university. Let's just start, as we're chronicling the successes of modern universities, let's just get a sense of Nobel Prize winners. There's so many different categories, so many different ways, research dollars raised, innovations, inventions, patents. There are so many wonderful ways we can chronicle just what a success story in terms of material progress our universities have been, but let's just take the top 5 Nobel Prize universities in America. We start with Harvard, 151 winners of the Nobel Prize. Now, officially, that's 47. And what differentiates those numbers? A university like Harvard will take credit not just for Nobel Prize winning faculty. In other words, people on their faculty who win the Nobel Prize in the areas of science or chemistry, or even in the case of Harvard, Barack Obama, right, who attended Harvard and who won the Nobel Peace Prize under very dubious circumstances in 2009. I mean, he pretty much won the Nobel Peace Prize simply by virtue of being elected. Nevertheless, it is an award. And so a university like Harvard will count what Obama did, Obama's winning of the prize, even though he technically wasn't at Harvard when he did it. That's the discrepancy. So Harvard claims 151 winners. That's 151 Nobel Prize winners that maybe just did their undergraduate work there, and then graduated, went on, and 30 years later, after an illustrious career somewhere else, won a Nobel Prize. But 47 official in terms that they can claim in terms of people who were intimately associated with their university. Columbia University, a remarkable 101 winners and an official 82. University of Chicago, 89 flat-out winners of the Nobel Prize, many of them in economics. The number of professors of economics at the University of Chicago who've won Nobel Prizes is staggeringly high. The University of MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, 83 winners, actually 78 official winners. And UC Berkeley, the California system in general, but Berkeley, 69 winners, officially 61. So that's a staggering number. You add those numbers together. Forget the inflated numbers, 47, 82. 89, 78, and 61. You add all those together, again, you're talking about more Nobel Prizes than most countries can brag about across their history. Really just staggering in terms of their achievement. And I wanted to take a moment here and look at in practical economic terms of what this means at these major universities. We're going to take a quick look here at the 10 universities with the largest endowments. Now, to me, this is a controversial issue. It is absolutely fantastic that our major research institutions are so flush with cash, to the tune of billions of dollars. Schools like Harvard, you can see, if we go to the first slide, Harvard sitting on an endowment, just banked money in property and actual hard cash assets of about $32.7 billion. And when you think about, why do I say this is a bit of a controversial issue? When you think about the cost of tuition and how exponentially tuition has gone up every year, not just at major universities like Harvard, but at every university and college in the country. How much money taxpayers then are expected through government grants, through government funding of research, through government loan programs, through government, again, Pell Grants, things like that, and immediate giving to the universities. How much of our tax dollars and state money, too, goes to fund these institutions. And when you think about it, you've got a university like Harvard that's sitting on $32.7 billion that they can spend on whatever they want, and they don't spend much of it every year, proportionately, because they're still pulling in all this taxpayer money. And so I could see, on the one hand, Harvard preserving much of its endowment and taking advantage of taxpayer money. And if they're doing all of that, though, if they're sitting on $32 billion, plus they're getting billions and billions every year from the state of Massachusetts, the taxpayers of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and certainly from the federal government, from various outside federal, state, local, and private research grants to help aid and fund their research programs going on all throughout the campuses, they're getting all that. Why is tuition going up so exponentially? Why in the world do they have to charge so much money? And why is that, the tuition and the fees that the students pay, keep going up? These universities are absolutely flush with cash. And by the way, we don't tax. In most instances, we do not tax the endowments of these universities. To me, this is a huge problem. The progressive zeitgeist that runs the campus is a shocking thing. We know from top to bottom, we'll see this in our next segment 4, but how utterly, irredeemably progressive the universities have become, how absolutely hostile and borderline intolerant they've become to anything but the most progressive of arguments. And yet, when you stop and think about it, for all the Marxism that you get on campus, all the cheap cultural Marxism, the social justice pitter-patter that you get from them, all of this anti-free market, anti-capitalism garbage, these places are flush with cash, and they don't pay taxes on their endowments. So on the one hand, right? Our federal tax money is going to these colleges in droves. State money is going to these colleges in droves. Private groups fund scientific groups funding research are dumping tons of money into these schools. They've already got these huge endowments, and they pay no taxes on their endowments. Unlike you and I, what we hold, we pay real estate, we pay property taxes on what we have. They don't. And that's real shocking when you think about how what they're teaching our kids primarily is to despise the very system that has given them and protects their wealth for them. That's a shocking realization when you think about it. So while we certainly don't begrudge universities like Harvard their tremendous wealth and endowment, and it must be said too that much of what they do spend, you can see there at the bottom, they're endowed with about $32.7 billion of hard assets. The average cost for tuition is $14,445 a year. It's actually more than that, especially when you factor in room and board fees and various other things. That $14,000 a year, if you're only paying that at Harvard, you're doing pretty well. It really is more. The average salary that they pay their faculty member is a whopping $151,000. Now, you would think, though, when you think about Harvard and you think about that $32 billion endowment, you would think, given that it is the premier research university really in the world, that $151,000 average salary is not that much. Certainly for a professor at the University of Wisconsin system who doesn't even make half of that teaching English. To me, that's a lot of money. It's more than double my salary. But for a place like Harvard, when you think about what these effete, elite professors at billions and billions of dollars endowed universities, it's really not that big of an average salary when you stop and think about how much money there is to play with. And an annual research budget at Harvard University of $799.4 million. So less than 1/32 of their endowment is spent every year on research. And keep in mind that all of this wealth produces wealth. The interest on their cash holdings, the mortgages on their properties, all of these endowments are just growing money by leaps and bounds. So in other words, the interest Harvard makes on its endowment for 1 year is almost enough to probably cover that entire research budget. It should also be said that the major universities like Harvard, they defray a good deal of the cost to attend these universities. So when they take really bright kids from impoverished circumstances, when Harvard admits kids who don't have the legacy, not a Bush kid or an Obama kid, average working Joe families whose kids get into Harvard, oftentimes, besides the federal money that the federal grants that the students receive and are able to apply for, besides student loans that the kids take in ample numbers, particularly at Harvard University, Harvard will also then offset the cost of the tuition for the kids they really want to come there. So the universities do give some of that back. But when you think about the rhetoric coming from campuses, particularly leftist Ivy League schools like Harvard, about anti-wealth, anti-capitalism, we are the 99%, the Black Lives Matter, social justice activism, all this stuff on campus that you really don't send your kids to school for. The old quaint notion that you send your kid to college to get an education, to be the best historian he can be or the best chemist she can be. That's all now subsumed, awash in all of this political gerrymandering that they're doing. Coming in second is really interesting is the University of Texas system. This also gives the lie, I think, to the effete liberal narrative that Southern schools, that Texas schools, that non-elite Ivy schools are in some way less evolved, less committed to education, that the alumni of those schools are somehow less progressive than their northeastern counterparts. Coming in a crisp second is the University of Texas system. A large part of this wealth has come from individual donors such as the Moody Foundation, Hearst people, the Mulva Family Foundation, again, Bill and Melinda Gates Science Complex, Dell Computer Science Hall, Red McComb School of Business, all results of large monetary contributions. And this is the thing that drives me nuts. Are you seeing a pattern here in our first two universities? At Texas and at Harvard? The irony of, again, faculty that is oftentimes remarkably anti-cap, particularly in the humanities, and that's across all the humanities, even in many business colleges now. I've taught at 8 universities, and you would think the business programs at those 8 universities would be the most pro-business, most skeptical of Keynesian economics, the most skeptical of Marxist socialism, but they're not. And every university I've taught at, from big research universities like Purdue and Oklahoma State University to small liberal arts colleges, I found that the business faculty on the whole, tends to gravitate more to the left than the right, and tends to be a little bit more suspicious of business than necessarily completely invested in it. And so here at the University of Texas, notice what you don't see. You don't see faculty members. You don't see college deans. You don't see social workers, for lack of a better word. Social justice warriors. They're not the ones necessarily doing all the donating back. These are capitalists, people who graduated from Texas and Harvard, went on and took advantage of the wonderful system we have in this country to raise wealth, and then, without the government forcing them to at gunpoint, are you listening, Bernie Sanders supporters? They voluntarily gave their money back to these universities. That's the way the system works. Without capitalism, this money wouldn't be a part of the schools, right? And so at Texas, you have all of that. And how about sports, too? The University of Texas has also been able to boast a valuable ESPN deal worth a reported $300 million. The Longhorn Network, the idea that Texas sports is such a big brand that $300 million, that would run most schools for a year, $300 million, much more than that. The endowment at Texas is $25.4 billion. The average cost per student, again, it seems like it would be larger than Texas. It really isn't. The average salary of full-time, this makes sense, right? A good $50,000 a year less than what you can expect to make at Harvard. An annual research budget bigger than Harvard's, $1.12 billion system-wide. Now, in fairness, Harvard is really one main campus, while the Texas schools are spread out over a number of UT satellites. But still, that's a remarkably impressive number for such a backward red state, don't you think? And if we move a little bit forward, our third largest endowment, hardly surprising, Yale University. Some of Yale's largest single donation contributions have occurred in just the last 5 years. So as the economy goes south, right, donations to private universities go up. In 2010, for instance, Zhang Li, Chinese MBA graduate from Yale, donated $9 million, nearly $9 million that year. The next year, media magnate John C. Malone followed that up with a $50 million donation. And in 2014, former Franklin Resources chairman Charles B. Johnson gifted Yale a massive $250 million. The endowment of Yale is paltry compared to that of Harvard, only $23.9 billion. The average cost higher than both Texas and Harvard seems to be $18.479. Average salary for full-time faculty, $198,000 a year. That's bigger even than Harvard. And annual research budget, half, right, of Texas, about $489 million. And we see Stanford in the fourth position, Stanford in California. Stanford has solidified itself as the leading fundraising college in the United States. Let that sink in. In California, the most tax-backward state in the union, the most business-unfriendly state in the union, the most progressive state in the union, Stanford has solidified itself as the leading fundraising college in the United States. Since 2001, it has received a number of sizable monetary gifts from big-name donors such as the Hewlett Foundation, Philip H. Knight, Dorothy and Roberta King, and real estate mogul John Arrillaga. The endowment at Stanford is a more than respectable $21.4 billion. Average cost per student, almost $20,000 a year in Palo Alto. Things ain't cheap. Average salary of full-time faculty, $143,000, an annual research budget, a whopping $903.2 million. That's remarkable. The good work that schools like Stanford are able to do, again, a lot of that money is offset. The endowment's not touched for a lot of it. In the next place, we find Princeton, which is in many metrics has been rated the #1 university in the world, superseding Harvard. Princeton's wealth includes traditional endowments, graduate donations, a world-renowned art museum which houses pieces by everyone from Warhol to Van Gogh. Former eBay CEO Meg Whitman, Big Lib, donated $30 million to complete Whitman College, while the Center for Iran and Persian Gulf Studies, kind of an effete, arcane thing, right? Princeton's Center for Iranian and Persian Gulf Studies was partly funded by a $10 million gift from graduates Bijan and Sharman Ramani. Jeff Bezos, of course, the founder of another big lib, the founder of Amazon. They're the president of Amazon, is also a huge contributor to Princeton. An endowment of $20.7 billion. The average cost for student over $20,000 a year. And the average salary, this is interesting. The most expensive school, more or less, we've seen so far, and their average faculty salary is only about $100,000, which is a lot lower than the other schools. And an annual research budget of only $280 million. Princeton is a smaller school than some of the others. And finally, the second 5. That was the top 5. We'll just do a quick breeze through the next 6 to 10. The entire University of California system with an endowment of $13.14 billion, $3.14 billion. Average cost per student, $16,000. Faculty, $88,000. And by the way, in California, that ain't nothing, right? $88,000 a year in most places of California. It's like $40,000, $50,000 in Main Street, USA. Annual research budget, a very respectable $643 million. MIT, right? $12.4 billion endowment. Cost per student about 20 grand plus a year. Average faculty salary, $124. Annual research budget at MIT, and that makes sense. Massachusetts Institute of Technology is primarily a research school. Annual research budget of $1.35 billion. Believe it or not, Texas A&M University comes in the top 10 with an 11, and that's on top. That's not included in part of the University of Texas system. Another big school in Texas, Texas A&M, with an endowment about $11.1 billion. Annual research budget at A&M, $777 million. That's amazing. And Northwestern in Chicago and Evanston, Illinois, $9.78 billion, and University of Michigan, $8.27 billion. And these are, of course, some of our elite public schools. Annual research budget at Michigan, $851 million. I mean, the accomplishments, the achievements, the money, I mean, it's just absolutely staggering. But then you get this, on the other side of the coin, right? I suggested to you that with all that money, all that endowment, all that federal and particularly state and particularly federal money, all that grant money, research money, to be a research professor working in the sciences, chemistry, biology, to be that at a major university like any of the ones we've just listed, you better bring in your own funding. So they hire professors who only hire professors who can attract outside research dollars. Professors have their labs paid for. Professors will have their research paid for by companies, corporations, private entities that are going to support, and even, of course, public ones, who are going to support and propagate that research, oftentimes the federal government. So even the tuition, even what they pay their professors in these major fields, doesn't necessarily always come out of Harvard's pocket or the University of Michigan's pocket. That these big endowments, that these big money grants that the professors are bringing in, that the universities are hiring the professors for, covers almost all of it for them. Soaring tuition and fees. And with all of that going on, why is it that college is becoming increasingly out of reach for the average kid? Doesn't make sense. With all that money floating around there, that kids are getting gouged at college in ways they aren't gouged in any other ways. Average annual increase in college tuition from 1980 to 2014, right? 34 years, grew by nearly 260%, compared to 120% increase in consumer items. So consumer goods, basic consumer goods, and that includes gasoline, right, fluctuated in the last 35 years about 120%. More than double that is the cost of college tuition. It's not like the basic fundamentals of education have changed that radically since 1980. Yes, I get that there are tremendous technology advancements, computerization, bandwidth, all that stuff, but 260% increase for what is still basically kids sitting in wooden desks being taught by professors. There's no reason for it. There's absolutely no excuse for it. Not only do you have the annual increase in college tuition, in 1980, the average cost of tuition, room and board, and fees at a 4-year post-secondary institution was about $9,500 a year, right? Post-secondary, typical 4-year college, about $9,500, and that was everything. Tuition in 1980, room and board, fees, about $9,500, according to the Department of Education. Current costs have climbed to almost $24,000 a year for the similar product. And as you just saw from some of those slides that I showed you, we're not necessarily, for those of you who aren't involved in universities, you might tend to think that these professors are making way more money than they actually are. I can tell you from my own experience, I've been a university professor for 25 years. In 25 years, I've received raises in 4 of those years. So 21 out of my 25 years as a professor, we received nothing, not even a cost of living raise. 4 times I got them, and it was never more than 3%. Never. So 4 raises in 25 years and never more, 1%, 1%, 2%, and 3%, I think is what it was. And you think about the cost of living over 25 years, it is really true that if you want to you'll make more money as a high school teacher. If you have a 4-year degree in college and a high school teacher, by the time you've put in your 20, 30 years, you'll end up making a lot more money than the average college professor, even though a professor like me, it was required that I have 8 to 10 years of 10 to 12 actual years of graduate school before I could even be hired in a university to make less. And so you see the disparities here. In other words, the real problem on college campus is not necessarily the salaries of the professors, as we'll see moving forward. And of course, the big elephant, the big looming elephant in the room that's going to trample us all, student loan debt. We have perversely democratized college. I mean, I know that sounds odd. I began the segment by praising the universities for their willingness to provide opportunities for students who otherwise would be frozen out financially. Having said that, one of the reasons they're frozen out financially is because of the way the universities do business, right? The kind of control, the kind of protectionist attitudes they have to their own endowments, their reliance on taxpayer money to pay for many of the things that in reality we should expect them to. If we're going to tax all these other things, why not tax the endowments? That's a plan that's sort of being floated. Not surprisingly, for all the universities' willingness to spend your money, they're not as keen to spend their own. But this slide about the national debt should scare us. U.S. student loan debt is now at $1.26 trillion. $1.25 trillion, right? $1.25 trillion is such a large number I can't even pronounce just that. That much money is staggering. In fact, our American college kids now have more student loan debt than the collected credit card debt of the country. Let that sink in for a minute. Take everybody's credit card, all the frivolous credit card, all the interest on those high interest earning credit cards, all the spending on credit cards in the country. It's dwarfed by what our kids have in student loan debt. In other words, we have allowed kids into college who probably don't belong. I've made this point to you before, that literally about 40% of my students, 1 in 4 in 10, they're not qualified. They either intellectually cannot do the work. Many of my kids, a fair number of them, read at a 7th, 8th grade level, and these are graduating juniors and seniors. It's our fault, really. It's hard to blame them. I mean, it's not, you have to look at who educated them, and that's the American public school system, and that's us. Social promotion, the idea that if kids show up and they're paying all this money, this idea that schools should be run like businesses now. Things like grades and accountability, well, the customer's always right. So there's been a corporate aspect, too, that's helped drive this, a corporate aspect of the way the universities are managing their funds and treating their students. But we're taking way more students than we can reasonably afford to educate and give a good educate to. And we know this, right? If you're bringing in an underclass of 30, 40%, 3 or 4 out of 10 kids who either intellectually cannot do the work, they're not prepared, they can't do it, or who attitudinally won't do it, that's a big problem, too. There are a number of kids in my classes every single semester who, in theory, if they had any discipline, drive, or determination, could certainly buckle down and succeed. But social life on campus, all sorts of other distractions, boyfriends, girlfriends, sports, all that other stuff, makes them unwilling to do it. And so when you factor those two things in, what happens? You're bringing in 30, 40% of undergraduates every year who can't make it work for one reason or the other. What inevitably ends up happening is that you have to lower the standards. You don't teach to the top 60% anymore. You teach to the bottom 40. You have to. As a professor, I can tell you this, tenure or no tenure, if I failed 40% of my kids every semester, I'd be out of a job. The kids wouldn't take the classes. They wouldn't sign up for them, right, if you had that kind of a standard. If you just failed the ones who didn't belong there, 30, 40% of them, you'd be out of there. You'd be in the dean's office tomorrow, right, because those are tuition-paying kids. Those are kids who are helping you build the new sports stadium, helping you put the new building up on campus, help you build the new workout complex, these high-end dorms and workout complexes that our universities are investing in. You want to draw today's student. It's not about the classroom experience. It's about workout facilities. My university, a few years back, built this incredibly lavish exercise building, gyms. You can't call it a gym. That's too much sweat and dirty towels. What they built was a complex. It's got rock climbing. It's got all this stuff in it. As a matter of fact, so lavish is it that the faculty is not allowed to use it unless we pay for it. So the kids get to go free, but if faculty members want to use this lush new exercise arena, we got to pay hundreds of dollars a year to do it. You can see the sort of disparities in how these things work. But 1.26 trillion in student loan debt, 43.3 million American kids with student loans. Let that sink in. That's a huge number of college kids. Average monthly payment, it's actually a little higher than this now, but $350 a month was the average there in 2016, early 2016. $351 a month average. These are kids who are graduating from college with this kind of loan debt. Those are the minimum payments on their loans. That's not paying extra. That's your minimum monthly payment. And a delinquency rate for our American college kids of over 10%, which is staggeringly high. And this one blows me away, too. You think about this. Here is a pie chart from 2014. It's actually gotten a little bit worse now, of our federal government's total financial assets. These are the assets generally broken up in a pie chart of the American federal government. This is what they own. This is what they make money off of. This is what they can claim that makes them solvent. And you can see, right, 11.7% of the pie chart, the green there, is loans and advances. You've got 2.1% corporate equities, 2.9% trade receivables. You've got 9.9, look at that one, 9.9% of our federal assets on a yearly basis is tax revenue. We've raised more taxes under the Obama administration every year than all previous years. And yet we're still covering about 10% of what we spend with our taxes. It's almost embarrassingly small. And the number that should absolutely horrify you, student loans. Technically, those loans are held by the government, and that's a mistake, by the way. But these loans are owned by the federal government. It's the federal government giving the schools, the universities, money on behalf of the students, saddling those kids with debt. In many instances, they won't pay back, already defaulting at more than 10%. So 45.3% of all federal assets is our kids' student loan debt. That's a bad, bad bet to get that money back for almost 50% of your operating expenses every year. And you think about that. 45.3% of our total federal government financial assets is student loans. Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, even Donald Trump in an offhand way, but certainly Sanders and Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, right, former Harvard professor, now goofy senator in Massachusetts, that these people are all saying we must immediately waive student loan debt. We must just clear the books. It doesn't matter that the kids signed contracts. It doesn't matter that the kids got those loans knowingly as adults. Got to waive it. Can you imagine just simply writing off that amount of our federal assets? Just getting rid of it? And then on top of that, having the American taxpayer completely fund the cost of college education for everybody to make it free. You see the financial schemes here. This is absolutely undoable, but this is what your progressives want. And by the way, it should be pointed out that your progressives caused the problem. It is true that prior to 2008, when Obama took office, it is true that the federal government lent out loans, that they gave loans to certain kids. But the bulk of the loans that your kids were getting to go to college were from the banks before Obama. And that meant that banks would only lend money to kids that they knew were going to pay it back. So the banks lent money to kids who were going in fields that were guaranteed to return their investment. In other words, if you wanted to go to college to be a creative writer or an English major or an environmental studies person, a bank wasn't going to give you $100,000 twice a year to go to a school like Harvard because you weren't going to make that money back. And as cruel as that may seem, that's business, right? And so when Obama took over, fully federalized the student loan program, basically the argument was that anybody who wants to go can go and we'll pay for it. All right, and that's why you got that number. So the progressives gave money to kids who were going to enter into fields that they could not reasonably pay that money back, which could take them years and years saddled with debt, all to satisfy their vanity, right, of this kind of social justice paradigm that it doesn't matter if you're going to be a rocket scientist or a poet, doesn't matter. You're going to get the same amount of money to go to college, you can go to the same kinds of colleges, and you could rack up the same kind of debt. But we know how that works out. What you're doing to those kids in the name of your great progressive experiment is you're ruining their futures, right? If we move forward, take a look at the chart. Big debt on campus. Back in 2003, that 10-year period from 2003 to 2013. And this is measured in billions, by the way, billions of dollars. Student loan debt has nearly quadrupled from 2003 to 2013, quadrupled. You start back in 2003, student loan debt was about $250 billion. Doesn't that seem like a small number to us now? What has happened economically to this country when $250 billion seems like a pittance? When you consider the fact now that we're over $1 trillion, more than 4 times as much student loan debt in the space of 1 decade. That's staggering. And this is the venality of your universities. Your universities why are they taking kids who really don't belong, who really can't pass the entrance exams, who from the moment they set foot on campus have to be remediated? Why are we doing that? It's not because in many instances, in my 25-year experience with universities, it's not because, or primarily because, we're interested in expanding the demographics of the university. It's because all the money those kids are bringing to campus is the government's money. And you know as well as I do that if the government's giving you money, you don't have to worry about it being good or not. If these kids default on their loans, it's not the universities that have to pay the money back. They've spent it. It's the kids. And so what a horrible situation you're putting a lot of these students in. In just a 10-year span, over $1 trillion, and it's quadrupled. There's no other industry, no other commodity that's gone up that much. The next little chart here, what young people make and what they owe. The red line is what kids owe coming out of college. The blue line that has now interesting, what happened in 2009, all right? Blame it on Bush if you want, Obama certainly does. Blame it on Obama, but it's both of them, right? This whole housing crash, the market bubble, the housing market burst, you had the little depression there, recession in 2009, and notice that since 2009, that blue line of student graduate earnings has dipped below, right? Negative growth. The student loan debt, the red line, keeps going up. Real practical dollars that our kids are earning are less and less and less than ever before. And really now, for the first time since we started measuring this, simply getting a college degree no longer guarantees employment that's better than what you could have gotten without it. There was a time that for a long time, a college degree always guaranteed that you would make more, that you would find a way to make more than non-college going students. And that's still mostly true, but the diminishing returns are really getting quite big here. When you consider how much debt a college graduate enters the workforce with versus somebody who started working right out of high school, making money, not spending it, you realize that pretty quickly the attractiveness for all of our kids, particularly that 30 to 40% who can't do the work, it doesn't make any pragmatic sense. Who owes the most? And this is typical, too, of our universities. All the talk about affordability and fairness. And look again, who's the most in debt for going to these universities, oftentimes for degrees that aren't going to help them, and without any really meaningful plan behind them. They're going because the money's there and they don't want to do anything else. 58%. Who owes the most? 58% total distribution of student debt by level of household net worth. So the bottom 25% in terms of money, right? The bottom 25% of students who come from the least money, they owe the huge preponderance of debt. So again, if you look at the far right side of the chart, the top 3% of kids, the kids in the top 3 income levels, they don't have any net debt because their parents write a check and pay for school all at once. They graduate almost debt-free, right? So the rich get richer, and the very poor, who oftentimes are being sent to school on false promises, an education of this sort is not for everybody. And certainly, I tell my kids, I've got so many 18-year-olds who don't belong. The best students I have at the university are the ones who take a year or two off and go do something else, even if it's just shovel manure, just something to get away from the school mindset. Roll up your sleeves and do something practical. The ones that come back after a year or two, even if it's manual labor, the ones who come back are the ones who appreciate it much more. They're much less likely to be in debt because they don't bite off more than they can chew. They've experienced life in the real world. They have a foot outside of that academic ivory tower bubble, which really literally exists. This bubble university world. We'll talk about that in segment 4. But the kids that do the best are the ones who come back later. Right? They're also the ones who realize that there is more to life than what you see on a college campus. People who have had to work for a year or two. I mean, if I were president, one of the things I'd love to do is offer a program that offered kids out of high school something to do, civic service, either join the military or engage in a new civic project, maybe put them on the borders, right? Use them as border guards, something that would then allow them to do something pragmatic and regimented to give them a taste of something outside of the academic bubble they've been in since they were 5 years old, and with the promise that after 2 or 3 years of service, the federal government then will help subsidize your college. Then you'll know, there are a lot of kids who wouldn't go. If you give kids a military, all that military training and technology education, you put them to work usefully in a civic sphere, many of them will recognize that it's not for them. They'll have made some money, and then those who do feel prepared to go, then we would be able to, as a country, I think, better help them. But that's a horrifying statistic. 25%, the bottom 58% of the lowest performing kids have the majority of that debt. It's pretty staggering. And you see here degrees of debt. So in 2012, the orange line is 2012, the blue is 24. So in 8 years, the debt of the average medical or healthcare student was $123,000. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a nurse, you're racking up you're going to med school, you're racking up about $123,000 of student loan debt in 2004. Today, 8 years later, that's ballooned to $161,000. Now, having said that, knowing what a new doctor makes, that doesn't strike us as all that bad. Effectively, what? The way doctors are currently paid now, interestingly, Obamacare is going to change this, right? Obamacare is going to make it much harder for doctors to make these kind of salaries, which means, as it's happened in all the industrialized countries that have socialized medicine, what happens? Fewer people go into the medical field because they can't make money, certainly commensurate with what their training is, and so doctors dry up and short, and we have doctor shortages. That's coming to a hospital near you very soon. But $161,000 for a doctor, that theoretically is about 1 year's salary, maybe even a little less than that for a good doctor, a doctor with a thriving practice. So that's not unreasonable, but now you drop down to the bottom here. For, how about the third one, a Master of Arts degree? I've got a Master of Arts degree. And I didn't take any loan. I refused to take any student loans out. I worked 50 hours a week while I was going to school. It was hard, but it was doable. And I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I pulled it off. Notice the Master of Arts there. A Master of Arts degree. 8 years ago, about $37,000 of debt. Now it's at $58,000, almost $20,000 more debt these kids are getting for an MA in arts. Look, $60,000 for the average master in arts. It's closer to 2 years' salary than it is to one, in a job where you're not going to get that kind of an increase. And you can sort of see working your way down what the problems are. An education master's degree, right? $30,000 in debt just 8 years ago, and now we're talking $50,000 of debt. And so you see how things have ballooned. And again, remember our endowments, remember the wealth, remember the privilege on the progressive American campus. Take one example, Duke University. Duke University, one of the premier private colleges in the country. Duke University, a full-time 1 year experience at Duke. That includes fees, that includes tuition, that includes room and board. $60,000 a year to go to school at Duke for 1 year. $60,000. This pie chart from 2013-2014 suggests to you what the expenditures are. Where does that money go? Where does Duke spend its money? Well, 24%, this is remarkable. Almost 1/4 of the money Duke spends every year, the university, goes to financial aid. And that's, on the one hand, that's wonderful. On the other hand, given that it costs $60,000 a year to go to Duke, that's awfully chintzy, isn't it? And it is true that most of the students who go to Duke do not pay $60,000. Much of it, as you see here, is subsidized. But with the kind of endowment Duke has, and to charge that kind of out, for what? What are you paying for that costs $60,000 a year to go to school in rural North Carolina? Right? It's not as if the libraries with electronic interlibrary loan, the electronicization of all these records and books, it's not like the library at Duke is so much better now than you can get anywhere else. What are you paying for? The quality of the professors? That's a sketchy argument at best. What are they paying for at Duke? 6% goes from, notice faculty salaries, right? Faculty salaries there, or general staff compensation, the yellows there. We're talking, what, 8%? 8% of the huge revenues that Duke spends every year, 8% goes to the faculty, goes to the teachers. Administration gets, notice administrative support, right? The administration gets paid, the relatively small number of administrators gets paid much more than the faculty does. And here's another chart with Duke, and you can see here what students actually pay. The percentage of students who pay nothing is pretty low. Only about 10-11% pay nothing. The number of students at Duke that pay full price, $60,000 a year, out of their own pockets or student loans, 55%. Right? So on the one hand, we praise Duke for spending 24% of its gross annual income on student tuition, but when you look at these numbers, it's not enough. The University of Michigan, same thing. Notice how much, this is the other really problematic thing. We already suggested to you that the bulk of the people making money on a college campus are not the professors. Professors make a comfortable living. All of us do. The reality is, however, we're not the ones making the big bucks. We've reached the point now where all these unnecessary administrators have been hired. At Michigan, we saw that was one of our top 10 schools. Notice this, 9,600 administrators to only about 7,500 faculty. So you have more administrators on a typical college campus than you have faculty members. And the administrators get paid significant money. College bloat, right? Here it is again. Notice this. Between 1993 and 2007, increases in administration expenses at U.S. colleges, notice, higher than any other cost there as administrative costs, gone up 61.2% to pay administrators. And these are administrators. You're hiring all these people to direct diversity initiatives, to be in charge of student residential life, to be in charge of dining halls. What is this money going to? I mean, you have this sea of bureaucrats now. Sometimes they're professors, by the way, who realize that the only way to make any money on a college campus is to become an administrator. They step up, they leave the classroom behind, that which they were trained for, classroom teaching. They leave it behind and they become these absolutely, almost always progressively motivated activist positions for administrators. The main bloat in administration has not been in practical management of the university. It's been in all of these diversity initiatives, all of this social justice, environmentalism garbage that now has become part and parcel of the university. And our last slide for the day, higher education. One more example from Minnesota. At Minnesota, management costs outpace teaching costs and enrollments, right? What do you got here? 45.5% of the entire Minnesota system dedicated simply to executive administrative payrolls. And the number of students, that's gone up 45.5%. The number of students has only gone up 20%, 22%, and the teaching payroll has only gone up 15%. It's a pretty shocking number when you think about it. This is from 2001 to 2011, over a 10-year period. Public and private college tuition. Across the United States, tuition has risen faster than costs. So from 2001 to 2011, private and public school college tuition has gone up 92%. Medical care has gone up 47%, 27% to the Consumer Price Index. That's where we are at the modern university. When we return for the next segment, we're going to look at now what accounts for a lot of this, and a lot of it has to do with the mindless, progressive politicization of campus. How much money are your kids spending on goofy initiatives that have nothing to do with what they learn?